Welcome to my second part of discovering and learning new music. In this video, we're going to be talking about learning new music. Learning new music is another very, very exciting part of any musician's playing career. If you haven't watched it already, go and watch my Discovering New Music. Now, there are a lot of things to actually consider when learning new music. The ultimate golden rule for learning new music is are you actually capable of learning whatever piece you have decided to learn? It's very difficult to imagine yourself trying to play it without trying to not get a second opinion or just thinking you have it but maybe not. But what I'm going to teach you today is what to actually go and look for in when learning new music. I decided to use Mozart's Clarinet Concerto as a good example of what to look out for, as Mozart's very exposed and you have to learn the notes. So I think this is a very good way of learning new music, learning something as famous as this. You can't really get away with Mozart, the lesson learned. So the first thing we kind of look at is the period of which your composition or whatever you're learning was written in. I already know the Mozart Clarinet Concerto, so I'm going to cheat a little bit, but you can do your own research via Google, via books, via absolutely anything you can possibly think of. Mozart was born between 1756 and 1791. He is born in the classical period, and for the non-musicians out there, the classical period ranges from about early 1700s to about 1830, roughly a 100-year gap. So we know this is the classical period. So when we think of the classical period as musicians, we think very elegant, very strict in form, and very set. Which brings me on to my next point, to style of the piece that you're learning. So this is the Clarinet Concerto in A major. But for us, for the clarinet and A people, it is in C major. Because we're in A, clarinet's already in A. A concerto, when we think of this, is it's whenever you think of concert or concerto, it's very flashy, you show off basically, and I think this is what Mozart had intended. We'll go through some notes later. The next thing you'll want to consider before you even start is actually who wrote it. So Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart wrote the Clarinet Concerto. You can find lots of stuff on Mozart. He is probably one of the names of the clarinet of the classical period, and you can find stuff on him pretty much everywhere. I don't even need to explain myself. Mozart's an Austrian composer. He was born in Hamburg in Austria and died in Vienna. As you can tell, I've already done my homework, but this is all part of the learning process at the end of the day. And that brings me on to my next point, the context of this piece that you're learning. Whatever piece you will play in your life, there will always be some form of context to go around it. The composers had reasons for writing the stuff that they did. Not necessarily all pieces, but definitely the major ones that we hear and listen to today anywhere. I can tell you that Mozart wrote this Clarinet Concerto towards the end of his life, like 3 months before he died. This was his last fully instrumental composition. The last ever thing that he did write was he was in the middle of writing his 41st symphony, but he passed away. He dedicated this Clarinet Concerto with a clarinetist called Anton Stadler, who was like one of the big names of the big clarinet names of the time. for context of compositions, you might want to know kind of what the orchestration is, if it comes with an orchestra, or if it's like a sonata for clarinet and piano, or just any context of what the instrumentation actually is. Because it's very interesting to find out what kind of orchestras the composers were using at the time. Mozart didn't really have... Yeah, he had an orchestra to work with, but it wasn't as massive as we know it today. These massive symphonic orchestras. You probably had about 20 to 30 musicians, if at most. So it was very small. But this was definitely a way for Mozart to use the clarinet to show off. And this brings me to my actual learning new music. So we've gotten the context already. And we've got the composer context, we've got the actual style of the piece, we've got the actual composer himself and what he's about. So let's have a look at these notes. As this is a concerto, and I'm going to cheat, this is actually a massive tutti section. So for the non-clarinet musicians out there, a tutti section is where the orchestra plays. You're not necessarily obliged to go and play the tutti section because it's very difficult and it's not designed for the soloist to play. It's very debatable whether you should be playing Mozart's tuttis or not. Personally, I don't, because it's a nice, lovely introduction to it, and we won't listen to it now. But we will definitely, but please go and listen to it. It's a very good work. And it's definitely one of the introduction to concertos, because you don't really go and discover new music. You don't really go and discover other concertos until you've listened to the Mozart, or at least that's from my experiences anyway. So let's have a look at these notes. Just to point out that dynamics and expression markings were starting to creep up, but they weren't really a thing in Mozart's time, especially in that era. The set dynamics and stuff didn't come until like the late 1800s. So you won't find many dynamics, so it is up to you to make that interpretation. Again, learning new music. So it starts off this edition in particular, starts off piano, which is a nice lovely dynamic. And it's quite nice. We notice you immediately see some semiquavers, which is a sea of black, which you will come back to later. If you want my tips on practicing difficult sections such as these, go to my practicing post, which I will link in the bottom of this page. And we've got lots of more semiquavers, and then there's a more tutti, because you see the word tutti, that means the orchestra comes back in. More solo stuff. I see lots of flats coming in. And you just go through the entire concerto, if you want to go through the entire concerto, but I'm just looking at the first movement for now. There's a lot of flashy moments I can see, because you've got this bada 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 bum bada 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 bada. It's a lot of fast passages, and then Mozart contrasts it with da 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 da, and a nice lovely cadence. So when you're learning new music, you should always go through the notes. Listen to a recording if you can. There are plenty of recordings of the Mozart Clarinet Concerto because it's so famous. You might even come across something interesting which you might not have heard before, such as this concerto. Notice it's like some form of repetitive passage, lots of arpeggios, goes up and back down again. When you learn new music, you always look at where things are going. If they're going up, if they're going down. So here, this passage, this phrase, which will lead, when we look a bit later, leads to a perfect cadence. It goes up and up and up and up, and then it comes back down again, and it comes to this cadence. And this is what you're kind of really doing in learning new music. Before you even attempt to go and play it, you look at the context, you do your research, and then you will know that you've done the base homework that you need for learning new music. And with my Discovering New Music video, you can apply this to any score that you find. I'm not gonna go through everything, but you can definitely just go through it, do some research on your composers, do your research on what the context was, and by the time you've done your research and looked at the notes and where everything is going, and looking at all the difficult bits, I can already see difficult bits within the first few bars. With a little bit of practice and learning it, that is my guide to learning new music. Thank you very much.